Okay, so now that all the dust is settled and we've had some time to dive a little bit deeper and investigate the fine print on these performance charts, let's look into Jensen's claim about the 5070 being 4090 performance from his keynote on stage last night, and give you all the grain of salt that you need to take with NVIDIA's comparison charts.
The XG2736 and the XG2536 gaming monitors from Viewsonic feature 240Hz default refresh rates, 1 millisecond response time mode, and industry-leading 0.5 millisecond moving picture response time modes that are ideal for gamers demanding a competitive edge. Designed with eSports in mind, these XG monitors feature fully adjustable and low-profile footprint stand for optimal viewing distance that professional gamers demand. To learn more about the XG2736 1440p and XG2536 1080p competitive gaming panels from Viewsonic, follow the link in the description below.
Okay, so the DLSS 4 feature that NVIDIA's websites and presentations seem to be bragging the most about is multi-frame generation, which is an upgrade from DLSS 3's frame generation technology. So to recap how DLSS 3 frame gen works, it takes an already rendered frame from the GPU and then uses AI to generate a new frame. So in effect, it'll double the frame rate by inserting a generated frame in between every rendered frame, increasing the smoothness to your eyes of what you're seeing. However, the downside is because the latency is still limited by the rendered frame rate. Say, for example, you're rendering 60 FPS and then you turn frame gen on. Now your eyes will be seeing 120 FPS, which is a lot smoother, but the game will still feel like 60 FPS because in effect, it is still running at 60 FPS. So that's the trade-off that you have to take with enabling frame generation, is that you're still limited in latency to the actual rendered frame rate. Now, DLSS 4's multi-frame generation will extend this all the way up to 3 generated frames. In effect, your rendered frame rate gets multiplied by 4 instead of 2. So if you're still rendering, in a hypothetical workload 60 FPS, and then you enable multi-frame generation in 4x mode, then your eyes will see 240 FPS, but the game will still feel like 60 FPS. So again, you're adding visual fluidity, but you're not adding any more responsiveness or any lower latency as if you would be running at that actual 240 FPS frame rate. So this is why on NVIDIA's performance charts with the 50 series, you see these huge gains on the games like Cyberpunk, Alan Wake 2, and Black Myth. Those are the games that support multi-frame generation on 50 series cards. Looking at the fine print, let's look at the 5090 comparison chart right now. It's really a comparison between the 4090 running old school frame generation, which is only 2 times the frame rate of the rendered rate, and the 5090 running multi-frame generation in 4x mode, which is 4 times the frame rate of the rendered rate. Surprisingly though, NVIDIA has kind of thrown us a bone with Far Cry 6 in these titles, because Far Cry 6 looks like it's not running any DLSS technology whatsoever, so no frame gen. And that performance figure, if you look at the chart, is probably going to be a lot more realistic compared to any of these inflated numbers with Cyberpunk and Alan Wake and so on. So finally, coming back to Jensen's 5070 equals 4090 performance claim. So let's go back to our hypothetical scenario. Let's say that a 4090 in a given workload is pushing 120 FPS with frame gen enabled. So it's rendering at 60, pushing 120 to the display because it's generating 1 frame per every rendered frame. Now in this hypothetical situation, a 5070 would only need to render 30 FPS to be able to push 120 FPS with multi-frame generation 4x mode enabled. So that's kind of the crux of that argument, is that no, it's not actually performing or rendering frames at the same rate a 4090 would. They're getting a big boost of perceived performance with this multi-frame generation technology being enabled on only the 50 series, and 40 series having to rely on just 1 generated frame instead of 3 generated frames per every rendered frame. Even on the website, they only brag about the multi-frame generation enabled titles when they're saying gamers will be able to experience performance twice as fast as the 4070 in games like Cyberpunk, Alan Wake, Black Myth, etc., etc. They don't mention Far Cry 6, they don't mention any other game that isn't going to have DLSS 4's multi-frame generation enabled. So again, that is a big asterisk and a big grain of salt that you got to take with these performance figures. Yeah, it sounds cool to say that, oh, this thing can push 240 FPS, but it's only rendering 60 FPS, and you're just adding 3 generated frames for every rendered frame. Again, this isn't to say that frame generation doesn't provide a benefit. Yes, it does visually look smoother, but the game will always only feel as responsive as the actual rendered frame rate. So that's the whole gist of Jensen's 5070 equals 4090 performance claim. They're using multi-frame generation kind of as a crutch to amplify those performance figures on a card that is obviously going to be rendering a lot less frames than a 4090 would. If you look at Far Cry 6 on the 5070 performance comparison chart, you get a lot more realistic answer as to what the real rendering performance would be between the 5070 and the 4070. Looks like it's about 25% faster than the 4070. 25% faster than the 4070 is not a 4090, obviously, otherwise that would be insane. But they're really pushing this DLSS 4 multi-frame generation technology to achieve those claims of performance of a 4090 with a 5070. So yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you guys have a little bit more information and some knowledge to help clarify these crazy performance claims. Do any of you guys use frame gen in your games? I've been digging it in Cyberpunk, but I find that it really does rely on the input frame rate being above 60. Like, at least you should be getting about 80 FPS before even enabling frame gen. Otherwise, it'll just feel like a 60 FPS game that's just really smooth on the monitor. Let us know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.